I'd like to say a word or two, or well, maybe a few more, about memory, remembering. I'm not thinking so much of those frantic moments you have, 2 or 3 minutes before you're supposed to leave the house, and you're kind of trying to remember where you left your keys. And I'm not thinking about those passive kinds of memories. The things that kind of flood over us beyond our control. When we look through old boxes and we find even older souvenirs. And they remind us of another season in our lives. We remember our first love and how it felt to experience that strong sense of attraction. Whenever I hear a John Prine song, I automatically go back to being 18 years old, filled with undaunted, youthful optimism. But I'm thinking of memory a little differently this morning. I'm thinking about a remembering that's more of a choice than an accident. Frederick Buechner speaks of remembering in this way, with these words. He describes a dream he had. I dreamt I was staying in a hotel, and the room I was given, I loved. It wasn't so much the way the room looked, as it was the way it made me feel. It was a room where I felt happy and at peace, where everything seemed to be as it should be, and everything about myself seemed to be the way it should be as well. As the dream went on, I wandered to other places, but I ended up back at the same hotel again. Only this time I was given a different room. A room in which I did not feel comfortable at all. I made my way to the front desk and I told the clerk my problem. The trouble was I didn't know where that room was or how to ask for it. But the understanding clerk said he knew exactly the room that I meant. And he said I could have that room anytime I wanted it. All I had to do was ask for it by name. So, of course, I asked what the name of the room was. And the clerk said he'd be happy to tell me. He said it was a room called Remember. Buechner goes on to say that at that moment he was shocked. He was shocked, awake, awoken by the sheer truth of it all. I knew it was a good dream, he writes, and in some unfathomable way, it was also a true dream. But why remember? What about remembering brought a peace so deep, a sense of well-being so complete that it jolted me awake? Today I want to say that both Palm Sunday and Holy Week are active memories, not passive ones. We might stumble across an old palm frond that we got a year or so ago, or maybe we'll find that Easter bonnet that we used to wear, or that old clip-on tie we wore in our childhood. But those are passive memories. Palm Sunday is like a room a room that we ask for by name. We don't remember it accidentally. We choose to focus on it with great intent. Well, let's open up the scrapbook of our family and go to those pages where Palm Sunday is remembered. We'll start with the oldest section, the Apostle Paul. Do you know he never mentions Palm Sunday in any of his letters? The ones that we're sure he wrote say nothing about Palm Sunday. The ones we think he might have written don't either. And then all the other letters in that section of the New Testament, Palm Sunday's never mentioned. About as close as we get, and it's a stretch, is 2 Corinthians 2:14, one of the verses we called ourselves to worship with this morning. Thanks be to God, who always leads us in a triumphal procession. All four of the Gospels narrate the entry of Jesus into the city of Jerusalem, and they have some very common elements in all of them. Jesus enters the city. Jesus is greeted by crowds who acclaim him king by quoting Psalm 118, verse 25, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And of course, you'll be pleased to know that the donkey is a constant. He shows up in all four services, and all four Gospels. Sorry about that. It's good to know donkeys are consistent, I guess. But John's version has some peculiarities to it, some differences worthy of note. For example, in the Gospel of John, it's a much shorter story. And there's no discussion of any preparation that may have happened before. No one goes to find a donkey in advance. The parade doesn't seem to be organized. More like a flash mob, all of a sudden there on the street. And only John describes the branches waved on that day as palm branches. And most importantly, there's a variation in the sequence of events. And if we start there, we get a glimpse into what John has to say about the nature of Jesus. Jesus makes his way toward the city. The crowd sees him, and then in an unplanned explosion of enthusiasm and exuberance, they break out in praise. It's spontaneous. A recognition that Jesus is the King of Israel. The palm branch is a symbol of Jewish nationalism. It is today as it was then. Even today in Israel, the shekel has the emblem of palm frond on it, embossed on it. The waving of the palm branch as Jesus approaches the city is the crowd making a political statement. This is our king. This is the one who will lead us in opposition to Rome. Here is the warrior king who will bring us liberation. So when Jesus experiences this spontaneous acclamation, he takes a symbolic act meant to speak back to this crowd. He borrows a donkey and he sits on it. It's a counterstatement to the political rally. He doesn't pick up a palm branch and wave it. He sits on a donkey. I don't suppose you've ever seen a 300-pound biker sitting on a tricycle, have you? That's what Jesus would look like, sitting on a donkey. Not a warrior. Not a battle cry. The donkey is a rejection of the palm branch. The kingship is not military. By sitting on a borrowed burrow amidst the waving palm branch, Jesus rejects violence as a way to usher in the kingdom. Brian McLaren sums up very beautifully how Jesus' death on the cross is a rejection of violence in this way. In dying, Jesus confronts the corrupt and compromised religious system and the violent and the unjust political and economic powers of his day. Through a non-violent resistance, he does not inflict suffering, but willingly suffers. In the process, the corrupt systems show themselves for what and who they are, sowing the seeds of their own destruction and making way the peace and the justice of God that will replace them. Not beyond history, but here on planet Earth. Jesus rejects violence, but the violent do not. Had Jesus simply fought violence with violence, he would not be remembered. He would have dissolved into the pages of history and been just another man with a sword willing to kill for his ideals. Had he fought violence with violence, we would not remember him as we do today. You know, it's fairly easy to kill for ideology. Osama bin Laden did it. Joseph Stalin did it. Napoleon Bonaparte did it. And in a strange and a twisted way, each one of us has been engaged in that same demonic dance. That you fight violence with violence. And the violence never, ever goes away. Never forget the name of Bernard Lafayette. Bernard Lafayette was 22 years old, and he was filled with idealism. And during the Civil Rights Movement, he decided that he'd go down to Selma and work on the voter registration campaign. So down he went. Now, he was a natural at it. He was really good. He signed up a whole bunch of folks to vote. He was so good at it that he awakened the resistance of those who did not want America to change. He was so good at it that when those who opposed him had opportunity, they met him in a back alley late one night and beat him. They hit him in the face with the butt of their rifle 4 or 5 times, blackened his eyes, broke his nose, split his lips, caused multiple stitches on his face. He bled all over his shirt. Everybody expected Bernard Lafayette to go home. But that's not what he did. He said, "This is just the symbol we need." And he walked around Selma, making sure everybody saw every stitch and every bruise. And he said, "This is why you have to register to vote." And all those people who sat on the fence, who didn't think the problem was really as bad as it is, had an example that they just couldn't shut away. He exposed the ugliness and the violence for what it truly was. And he helped all of us to see the truth about who we are, that we might, by God's grace and God's power, rise above that sinfulness. Jesus on the cross exposes our human violent nature. We are capable of killing our peacemakers. And now that we know that, let us choose not to kill our peacemakers. Today I ask you to dare to remember Jesus in that way. Not accidentally, not passively, but the daring act of remembering that is to go to that room and to look. To cherish the shard of a memory of one who would confront the violence of his day with a glorious and everlasting love. He traded in his palm branch for a borrowed burro. May we do the same. And may we show God's better way.